Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be my review for The Bad Batch Season 2 episodes 7 and 8. We got 2 episodes today, and what an incredible 2 episodes they were. That's the thing with this show, is that because of what they did in episode 3, you know that on any week they are capable of suddenly being like, we're going to do something in this episode, and you can trust that the episodes will deliver. But on the other hand, you know that also that episode is capable of being a complete one-off episode that doesn't really do much of anything. So you do get quite heavy tonal shifts episode to episode, like we did going from, the 2-part opener into episode 3, and then from episode 3 into what episode 4 was. It maybe wasn't as extreme here, because at least the Gungi episode from last week was interesting. We were dealing with clone related stuff, a Jedi character coming into play, and so straight away a 2-part episode as like a mid-season finale where we really delve into this conspiracy here and the Empire's plot to basically phase out clones and bring in the full-on military act, where the Empire military is this kind of recruited from the Empire, getting people in who are just loyal to the Empire, not a manufactured army, but more of a typical thing. Really kind of solidifying that, once the Empire has their own army made up of citizens from the Empire, that's solidifying quite a lot into place. And I just love that they were able to deliver, especially with episode 7, which was a much more politics focused episode, and they kept the Bad Batch out of that one, and then they let episode 8 be more of the Bad Batch comes into things. That's your more typical action fare. But episode 7, they just made Chuchi, Senator Chuchi was the main character in that episode. And I thought that was an amazing decision to do. And in a way, that's what the Bad Batch is capable of doing. Because there's not that much going on with them individually as characters, you can let them be completely outshone by a new kind of guest recurring character. You can let Rex, Senator Chuchi, a little bit of Bail Organa, you can let them take the focus, because that's kind of in a way what this show is, in a way, because they're more doing one-off episodes. They haven't fully decided on the direction for the Bad Batch. You can do stuff like this, and it works. That, yeah, you didn't need the Bad Batch in this first episode, because you just needed to get deep into these episodes, and it felt like some of the politics episodes from the Clone Wars, those arcs that we had, and all the references, like with Senator Bertoni kind of coming back, like Senator Chuchi herself coming back, and then placing her effectively in what is typically the Padme position, but because of where we're set here, Padme's dead at this point. Here is your senator who has the best interests of everything at heart. And in this case, Senator Chuchi takes up the position of being the senator who wants rights and a proper plan in place for the clones when they are phased out. Like, to treat them like people retiring from a job that we created them to do, with accelerated aging. And now we're hitting that kind of time period where some of the earlier clones are who have survived this long are going to have to probably retire at some point, and there's nothing in place, because most people don't consider them to be kind of proper, true beings. And that's why Chuchi was so strong, I think, in this episode, because they just, didn't do too much about, what else she's involved in, like what you primarily know her from in the series. She's just a senator that we know, who, kind of like Padme, has, tries to do good stuff as a senator. And she just picks up this cause. And I think it fits quite nicely, because she's been there. Like, the clones have assisted her in the episodes that she was involved in previously. So you understand to a certain degree why she would kind of pick this up. And it made for a really, really interesting dynamic to effectively have a political battle between Senator Chuchi and Admiral Rampart, who, again, it was this character who, even after all of season 1, maybe the finale made him into a little bit more interesting of a character. What they've done with Rampart in basically just episode 3 and then these 2 episodes was really, really good. And then what they managed to do in episode 8 with the kind of Palpatine reveal and twisting the situation completely on its head. And it's like, oh, I thought Rampart was going to be our guy, like our main kind of enemy for like the Bad Batch. It looks like this is him like dealt with completely. Now maybe the Empire will utilize him in the background in some way. Maybe he will just be like eliminated off screen. I don't really know for sure, but it just like was impressive that they were able to just kind of absolutely shock me with some of the things that they were doing here. Again, to me, coming out of these episodes, kind of really highlighting that, wow, the writing quality here was really, really strong. And almost like a comparison to, say, like Andor, which people almost seem to think has like the exclusive rights to good writing in Star Wars, when it's like, no, we've had good written Star Wars before. Here is an example showing you that, 22-minute animated episodes, 2 of them in a row, can do a lot, that you can have good writing without like needing to have the pacing that Andor had, because there was some great stuff here with what we were dealing with, like the rights of clones coming into play, the conspiracy that, like, if you're a fan of, like, say, that Fives arc where the inhibitor chips were revealed, you got so many vibes of that with like Slip and Cade at the start, and then being hunted down by an assassin who, that was even a nice little mystery, because initially you're thinking like, okay, who's Rampart hired to take out people who would speak against him? Is it Crosshairs because it's a sniper? But then you're kind of like, he's missing a few too many shots. Like, it's skilled, but he's missing a few too many shots. And it's not that Crosshairs has never missed, but this feels like not quite that level. So, okay, it doesn't seem to be Crosshairs. Who is it? And then that gets revealed to be sort of like this idea. It's a clone, but it's not like a trooper. And then they later reveal that these are clones who've had their like CT code like kind of like erased. So they're these like kind of true believer clones, where this didn't seem to be like an instance of, like, say, the inhibitor chip was activated to make this clone fully loyal. This is like a full-on clone who properly, truly is an ally of the Empire, whereas most clones seem to be questioning a lot of what's going on here. And that was what was so strong about the start of this arc, was it's entirely about, basically, how has the Empire covered up what they did at Kamino, which is basically wipe out the entirety of like cities on Kamino. And it's borderline, it seems to be, they've nearly made the race of Kaminoans extinct. And that, I think the senator mentions that there's some of us scattered out across the galaxy, but because they're a relatively secretive people, you've got to assume that their kind of race, their culture is in trouble in a way because of what the Empire has done here. They're trying to get rid of like basically all clones, but in doing so they also basically eliminated an entire species here. And just the idea that they try to play it off as, well, there was a really, really bad storm on Kamino, the place known for just being like a rainstorm kind of like planet. And rightfully so, people are questioning, like, they've built their cities to survive in the middle of all of this. How could one random storm, no matter how big it was, have just done this? And so the whole arc is about the clones who were basically there, who saw what happened, who executed the orders to fire on Kamino. How do they deal with their kind of conscience about that they destroyed their home? Because that's the thing, the clones do view Kamino as being their kind of true home, and they feel it. That's what they were forced to do. They're meant to follow orders, but they also feel strongly that that's where they grew up. And that was what was so strong about those early sections with Slip and Cade talking. And so you were rooting for Slip along the same lines as Fives during the inhibitor chip arc, when you're hoping he gets away and doesn't get killed. And how cautious he is, and that, the clones, when they're dealing with these conspiracies, they get kind of quite manic and crazy, and the presentation is actually really well done. But Chuchi, of course, kind of ending up kind of coming across this, and her investigation into Rampart, and that the main kind of plot point here is that his ship has basically the footage of what they did. That I think they say like, yes, Slip had actually like saved it in a kind of backup data thing. So even though that of course would have been erased by him, one clone with a conscience kept it to maybe use it at a later point. And just how much the Empire is trying to like cover this up, to the point where they're lying to all the senators about what happened. And you also see it about like the really Empire allied senators as well, like when they have those Senate discussions, the ones who are like full on for like, oh yeah, our military assets, let's just dispose of them and basically introduce the Stormtrooper project here. And then you have the few opposition people being like, hey, there's a lot going on right now. The war is over. Like, why are we focused on dealing with our military assets when it's not that important? But of course, we are dealing with like the early stages of like the rebellion and stuff like this at this point. So there's some point to be made there about that. But the level to which they want this new program to be is obviously kind of up for debate. And so Bail Organa gets used here, of course, questioning Palpatine. And I really liked the reference in the first episode about like, he just points out to Masameda as like, what does the Emperor think about what's going on here? And he can only give the answer of just like the Emperor trusts that his kind of loyal subjects here will sort this out correctly. And so it made like the actual appearance of Palpatine in episode 8 so incredible, because a lot of there are times when Palpatine's appearances can maybe like not mean as much, but this one they just, I think, really went for it. That they wanted this to be like, this is a smoking gun. They have got the Empire on this. Because I was convinced the evidence, when the Bad Batch gets it, wouldn't make it to the Senate, and for sure would not have been played in front of every single senator. So when we got that, like, I was stunned that like they've got them. Like, how do we not know that this has happened before? How are so many more people not aware that this big reveal happened? They caught the Empire lying. But Palpatine comes up and is immediately like, thank you for pointing out that Rampart on his own did this to advance his career and his plan. And you have, showed us, a kind of villain in our midst. We will get rid of him and move forward with this. But then he's like, but we also need to address the fact that clones were the ones who executed this order. The fact that they would follow orders like that so easily means, and anyway, proves Rampart's point, that we need to phase out the clones and introduce loyal Empire citizens as our new military. The Stormtrooper project is needed now more than ever, and the clones need to be phased out. And it's like, it's a little blunt, but like, it's actually really clever twisting of the situation, where they have the evidence that shows the Empire committing an atrocity, but they managed to get out of it by basically just being like, it was one guy acting on his own, and it actually makes the clones look worse, that they would in a way fire on their own home and basically follow any order that needs to be dealt with. And it's just this amazing, immediate, complete table turn. You think they've got them, and then it's the complete reverse. To the point where the Bad Batch, reflecting on this, all the characters are kind of like, we've messed up quite badly here. We have now basically confirmed the Stormtrooper project. We have now made it inherently unsafe for almost all clones still aligned with the Empire, because this has made people double down on their dislike of the clones. And all it took was for them to just get rid of Rampart to do this. It was so clever and so well done, even though it was a pretty kind of simple turnaround. But again, it's just that visual of them showing like basically a war crime being committed right in front of everyone. It just felt like there's no coming back from this. But they did it, and they showed it, and they managed to turn it around and have it ultimately work. Because ultimately, Senator Chuchi and a few of our hero characters are like the only characters who truly care about the clones. Everyone else pretty much does treat them as just being, you know, biological droids, basically. And that's why it's ultimately so easy for so many of the senators to accept this explanation, because they are inclined to not particularly care about the clones. But the audience, of course, does deeply care about all the clones, because we followed them through the Clone Wars and all this sort of stuff. And it's just an example of like, this was sort of, whereas like Andor did a lot of its writing without feeling the need to be overly referential to other material. Here's how you use being referential to other series and shows super effectively by incorporating these characters that you've seen in previous episodes, and just an entire group of people's kind of, in a way, love for the clones, because that's what the entire Clone Wars ultimately was about. So many of those arcs showing you the loyalty the clones have to their Jedi generals, characterizing individually a lot of these characters. That was really, really strong. And that's the thing, they made you really root for Senator Chuchi, like a character who was only in like, what is it, like 4 or 5 episodes, if even that, maybe 1 or 2 more. I don't remember too many appearances from that character, but it's like, hey, there she is. I do remember her, even though she's in a relatively low number of episodes. And they made you care about her along the same lines as like you do care for like Padme in some of those other Senator conspiracy theory arcs. It was strong because you don't know exactly, like, does she survive long enough to make it? So you think like she could have been taken out in this episode, but they didn't. And now, in a way, does she have a target on her back now that Palpatine has had to interfere effectively because of just her meddling, which is something that he only ever really had to do around the likes of Padme, when she was interfering and potentially, like, you know, remember the arc where like Padme nearly got like a treaty between the Separatists and the Republic in the middle of the war happen, and it took Palpatine basically manipulating the situation to ruin those chances. That was really strong, and he did something very, very similar here, and now the pressure is on Chuchi. And then the Bail incorporation here clearly, I think, is teasing the idea that I think he's probably at some point going to maybe try and get her on board with some sort of rebellion thing, if because she's so committed to this cause that would fit exactly what he wants to do. So that was also, I think, really strong in this episode. That makes Chuchi actually now this character I'd like to see more of. If we're going to have more of a political plot in the Bad Batch, I would not mind seeing more of this character in play, especially like if she's going to work with Bail Organa going forward, and they maybe do stuff like with like Mon Mothma and so on. But we'll see what happens. But yeah, we do have to talk about the Bad Batch though, because they did get incorporated into this. So obviously, in the middle of the whole kind of trying to get to Slip, Chuchi finds him. This is where the assassin comes in, and it's actually Rex who saves Chuchi from the assassin. So then he, as we transition between episodes, calls the Bad Batch and brings them in on the mission. Come to Coruscant, I have a mission. You need to get the data, basically the video file, from Rampart's ship and deliver it to us. And then the key point, I think, in all this that really worked for the Bad Batch was that Omega basically went with Chuchi to act a little bit as like a bodyguard, as like one of the few characters who could just walk around because she's just a kid, and no one really recognizes her. Which was interesting because you're almost wondering, like, if Omega is meant to be this like very different clone that's kind of important, the likes of, say, Mas Amedda, certain senators, maybe Palpatine's becoming aware that she's in or around the place. Even like the Kaminoan senator is kind of like, do any of these characters know who she is? Like, she reveals she's a clone in front of the Kaminoan senator, Senator Braconi, which was kind of interesting. And I like that emotional scene because that character, as we know, represents kind of the worst of politicians, basically, and she was on the wrong side of things a lot of the time. But Omega was able to kind of hit the emotional core of the point here, is that, I was there, I saw what happened. Camino fell. Do you not care anything for, like, your people, your home? And she ultimately kind of does, which is why she does agree to kind of like give the information, kind of the follow the money plot point about, like, here's one way to stall at least a little bit. We maybe can't fully prove this one right now, but it will at least give a little bit more time. He will have to address why this money has gone elsewhere and everything that happened. So that was very, very interesting stuff there. And I think just Omega being shown around the Senate and being shown this is where big decisions in the galaxy are made, you realize that she knows so little about how all this stuff works, and she gets to kind of play an important role, handing over the big evidence to Bail Organa, getting it involved in the Senate, and watching this all play out. And it's like, okay, here we go. Is this sort of the trajectory for Omega as a character? Are we going to set up the idea that maybe she will go on to become some sort of a senator type character? Is that what we were meant to maybe take away a little bit from this episode? That's why she was basically taught a lot of these lessons in this situation. I'm not really sure, because of course I think we had similar stuff with like Ahsoka and Padme, where like Padme would teach like Ahsoka a little bit more about the kind of politics stuff going on. Not necessarily with the idea that like Ahsoka will become this politician. So it's not necessarily that, but either way, it's sort of just helping Omega to get to a point where she can make more informed decisions herself about the big kind of points being made. In the same way that it seems like Hunter and Echo are kind of having a little bit of a debate about should the Bad Batch get involved, choose a side in the truly join the fight against the Empire, and try and make something happen there, or should they just like hide and protect Omega? Now Omega, I think, is becoming more and more clear that like they probably do need to act against the Empire. And even the kind of big point on the Bad Batch side of things is Echo makes a choice. He decides that he is going to stay with Rex, that he feels he has to do something. He has to more directly help, that it was important for him. He respects the Bad Batch so much for saving him, and that was a group that he needed to be part of for a certain amount of time. But now he needs to be part of this, helping other people, being more directly involved against the Empire. And I think it was the right decision for the character to almost suddenly have that happen, almost kind of out of nowhere. It was slightly set up, but it was also a little bit of a surprise when it's just like, oh, Echo's leaving. And so, like Omega, you're also a little bit surprised. And on her side of things, this was a nice moment because she's upset at, like, I suppose, seeing another member of like the family leave. Because she basically had this happen in like the in season 1 with Crosshairs. Like, Crosshairs never rejoined the group, and like she's had to deal with kind of the loss of him. Now Echo has also left. And is that the direction that they're going in? Is Hunter so focused on just protecting Omega and like keeping her out of the big conflicts that this is what we're going to see? The group is going to eventually want to, we have a crossroads here. Do we try to do something, or are we just going to be on the run forever? Because like they're noting that, like, Sayid hasn't called them, so maybe something's happening there. But the group is now down a member, and that's so. What's kind of interesting about the ending of this 2-episode arc is that it seems like the Bad Batch are just going back to doing random jobs again. This was not the transition of the Bad Batch back into like the true focus of the main story. Now, maybe Crosshairs, when he gets reintroduced, will realize that, oh, it was the Bad Batch who attacked the ship. That's where the information came from, and he'll maybe get back on the trail. But where does Crosshairs stand now that Rampart has been like dealt with or whatever? Who's the new commander? Are they going to like? Is Thrawn coming into play? So not Thrawn. Tarkin, I mean. Is Tarkin coming into play here to maybe be the new kind of leader guy in that sense? Because it feels like there's almost no way for Rampart to come back into play unless the Empire is just going to like fake punishment, but he's kind of secretly active in the background. So Crosshair still has an arc stuff to do, and given that they seem to be accelerating now towards the decommissioning of the clones and the Stormtrooper project coming in, because we already had at the end of episode 3 him walking down a corridor and there basically being no other clones. In that, in terms of the people that Rampart was using, Crosshairs was like the only clone he was using. So that's going to become more and more apparent to Crosshairs, that he's like one of the only clones left. And then ultimately the idea is that, yeah, they don't care about them, full stop. So is that going to put Crosshairs out on his own? Will he try to rejoin the Bad Batch at this point? That's a kind of big one. So, I think there's some potential here. I do wish we had maybe set up the Bad Batch to straight away go into a little bit more of direct kind of like plot focus. Because again, we did just skip past, like we didn't start the episode with them still on Kashyyyk necessarily. Omega did mention though that, like, I guess off screen, Gungi did teach her how to like meditate, which she is kind of trying to do. Which was nice. I don't know if that maybe like teases anything or anything, but it was a nice reference at least to the previous episode. So they didn't directly set up any clear path for the Bad Batch. So I'm guessing we're going to go into some sort of a thing where we will do the Sid setup of like something going on there. She might betray them in some way. Will she react to the fact that they were dealing with Trandoshans in the previous episodes? That's an interesting one, but that feels like a kind of one episode arc type thing. That doesn't feel maybe like the finale. I think the finale will probably have to be more like, ultimately, what do the Empire actually do when like decommissioning day arrives and they just decide that, boom, we are now initiating the clones being phased out. What do they do? Because the Empire is inclined to do stuff in very blunt and brutal ways. That the Senator is proposing, like they need like pensions, and there needs to be plans for them. And I like that they did the other side of things as well. It's not just the Empire kind of needs to prepare for them, but also like the clones themselves, that you need to think about your own futures as well, because the one that spoke up is meant to be sort of representative for most of them. None of them have thought about what they do when they can't fight anymore. They all want to do something that is in some way involving fighting, but when they physically can't, accelerated aging, what do they do? And so she got them to think about that a little bit, which I think is an interesting concept. And I'm wondering, are we eventually building up to Stormtroopers versus Clone Troopers? Because I think this is when everyone saw that in season 1, that this is what this arc is about. It's about the end of the clones in the Empire. In like the Battlefront games, they basically show you, it's obviously a different sort of canon approach in that that one I think was more of just the Stormtroopers fight the clones as they kind of like decommission them that way. Here, are they going to change the dynamic slightly and lead to almost like a conflict on Coruscant, and the clones have to kind of fight for their lives here if they're going to potentially be like eradicated? Because obviously the clones they're going to get to the point where they probably will rebel, getting close to like the announcement date of like, we're not using you anymore. So how will the Empire handle that kind of PR? They're going ahead with it, but how will they actually do it to not get the clones working against them? And then, can the inhibitor chips be like utilized again? Like if Palpatine says like Order 66 again or something like that, does that just get them on side? Or is that specifically to fight Jedi? Is there another command he can give to the inhibitor chips to just, change what's going on here? That's another big problem. And I think that's probably where we kind of eventually have to go. I just wonder the exact details about how exactly we're going to get there. But these two episodes brought up some fantastic ideas, reintroduced characters, gave the Bad Batch, I think, a little bit more interesting stuff to do, and hopefully we will eventually get whatever their arcs are necessarily. Because again, I still think it does stand out a little bit that like Hunter doesn't really feel like he has an arc so far this season, apart from maybe not wanting to properly incorporate themselves in. Is that because he's just protective of Omega, or is it representative of something else? Wrecker is still kind of just Wrecker. Tech is still just Tech, you know, that sort of thing. Echo they at least did something with, but the group that's left over, it feels like, okay, now what do we do? Because again, you know, ultimately these were 2 episodes where the stars of the show were ultimately still Rex, Chuchi, and basically other characters. And it's Crosshairs who still stands out as being the best of the Bad Batch in terms of like true characters. But that is, I think, for the most part, everything I want to say about this one. You know, I think this will be an episode we're going to be referencing quite a lot going forward if we do continue these arcs like immediately next or whatever. There's going to be a lot of kind of secondary analysis on a lot of what happened in these episodes. So I was really kind of impressed with these 2, given that like I was getting a little bit frustrated that we were having a bunch of one-off episodes in a row. They went for a 2-parter here and it worked. It just 100% like absolutely worked and was really, really strong. So it just kind of continues the trend of this is an oddly confusing show where it is capable of delivering these 9, almost 10 out of 10 episodes that are really, really strong, but then can give you riot racing in the next episode. And look, the Clone Wars did a little bit of this as well, but the problem was you always had that, you always knew that even in a maybe weaker episode, Ahsoka's going to be the main character. Anakin, Obi-Wan, a new Jedi. The problem with these episodes is that we get these episodes and it's the Bad Batch who I still wish we knew better as characters. That's what needs to change going forward. Plot for the Bad Batch still needs to happen, even though they got incorporated somewhat nicely into this. And the Echo stuff was good, but more still needs to happen. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on these 2 episodes. Did you like them as much as I did? What are your thoughts on everything that we saw here? The fall of Rampart, Palpatine makes his big return, Chuchi being a really good character in these episodes. What were your thoughts on everything that happened here? But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.